Jane, talk about this story, this case, and as it's developed, your thoughts on Dawn Hutchison and the relationship that she has with her husband, Jeff.
I think it's evident from listening to him, from reading the police reports, and just from knowing the criminal history between both of them, that they're absolutely toxic for one another. They're dangerous to themselves, they're dangerous to each other, and really by the time it reached the level that it gets to us, they're dangerous to the community, they're dangerous to their neighbors, they're dangerous to police officers, and I wish you could say that you never see those types of relationships, but unfortunately we do.
When it comes to his discussion, and what he has said is that he bears some of the responsibility for what happened that day, for basically becoming a victim and getting stabbed in the back. Is there any way to hold him accountable for verbally what he may have said that prompted that attack?
Not in that instance, because I think when you look at that particular set of facts that he's talking about, certainly because somebody insults you or makes you feel bad or says something that's a sore spot with you, that doesn't entitle you to use what was deadly force. It doesn't entitle you to stab somebody with a knife. It certainly doesn't entitle you to stab somebody in the back. And so could they have been having an argument where one or both of them are agitating each other? Certainly, but you have to look at the severity of the action that happened afterwards. And when we looked at the investigation and when we presented the case, it led to our belief that what she did was commit a crime. Certainly they have relationship problems that they may or may not choose to address, but what she did was commit a crime.
At one point during my interview with Jeff, he said that he was, quote, like a martyr. Your thoughts?
I think he's certainly a little bit of an attention seeker. I think if you're trying to protect somebody from this story being talked about over and over again, probably don't keep going to the media with it over and over again. Certainly a person that's attracting attention to Dawn's struggles right now is him. I think he has his own history of domestic violence, his own history of abuse, his own history of being dangerous towards women. So he certainly has some issues as well. In this particular case, he is the victim because he's the individual who was stabbed in the back.
At one point in time, he claimed that he had never done anything physical. You have access to history.
Right.
And obviously you guys have had to review that in preparation for this case. What have you found?
I would disagree with that. I think he tries to minimize, when he's talking about his own bad acts, he tries to minimize what he did, or he always has an excuse for why it was the fault of the police or the fault of the prosecutor or the fault of the system or the fault. I don't see a lot of him accepting any responsibility for his past bad acts, and then he turns around in this case and wants to say he doesn't want to see her prosecuted, he wants her to be let go. Well, quite frankly, that's not his decision to make. We have to look at the safety of her, of him, and of the people that live here. So what he wants in terms of, I listened closely to your interview. He doesn't want her to be convicted, and he doesn't want her to serve any time, but he doesn't want her to go to a mental institution. He wants to claim that her problems are all mental health related, but she refused to accept treatment when it was offered to her. And you can't have it both ways. There are consequences for these types of actions, and that's exactly why the case was presented to the grand jury and why it'll now be set for trial.
Yeah, let's get to the bottom of the mental health issue here, something you just touched on. He says that essentially you guys are keeping her in jail. And by you guys, I mean the county.
Sure.
Is keeping her in jail, and you're not allowing her to get the attention that she needs.
Right.
Just touch on
that.
And
I think it's flatly false. When she was arraigned, she wanted to be placed on house arrest, and we didn't think that was safe for her or for him or for the public. And the judge offered her right then and there the ability to go to an inpatient mental health treatment facility so that she could get help. She immediately refused. She would have none of it. So they're both kind of in this position of they want to do everything on their terms. She did something that could have caused his death and wants to remain out and get treatment as she sees fit or as she feels like it. And I just don't think that that's safe for the people that live here.
Here's something else that I wanted to address. He makes claims that there isn't sufficient help in Jefferson County or really in the Ohio Valley. What facilities are there available to someone perhaps like Dawn that suffer with issues of a mental capacity?
Well, there are both, there are limited inpatient treatment facilities here, but there are plenty of outpatient treatments here. There are programs for people, for women who are battered, who are in difficult relationships. There are places for them to go and seek help. There are support groups. There are outpatient facilities here. There are options here. And certainly there are options short of what happened in this case, short of the type of violence that we saw in this case.
As far as Dawn is concerned, is the court still open to allowing her to get medical attention? Because Jeff seems to have closed the door on that.
I hear him saying a lot that she's, one of the things that concerned me in your interview was him saying she wasn't going to be allowed to make any decisions without him. And I find that disturbing. I think that she has very competent counsel to represent her, and if the issue of treatment was brought to the court again, certainly her counsel would have the opportunity to do that. Right now, our hands are all a little bit tied because she was offered help and just refused to accept it. So certainly her lawyer could bring that up to the court again if he thought it was best. And I think what would be best is for her to follow the advice of her lawyer, and that might be a better path from her than following the advice of her husband.
Common misunderstanding. He says he doesn't want to press charges. People would say that you guys dropped the case. That's not how it works.
Yeah, individuals don't press charges. The state of Ohio presses charges. So we gather information from police investigations, from victims, from reports to come to us, and then the state, in this case the county, makes a decision about whether to press charges. So you take into consideration what the victim's position is, but it doesn't control the case. That's not the only thing that drives the decision making. We have a responsibility to the whole community. So you'll hear people say all the time, I want to drop the charges, or I don't want to press charges, or I'm not going to press charges. That isn't the decision of the individual. That's the individual. That's the decision that the state makes.
The defense's claim in this case is that she's battered or that she's the victim of abuse. What is the state's stance on that?
I think that's what we have trials for. I think certainly we want to hear all of the evidence in this case, and if it's the type of case that can't be resolved by plea negotiations, then I think that's exactly why you have a trial. You present a case to a jury, both sides, and the state presents its evidence and why the state believes a crime was committed in this case, and then the defendant has the opportunity to explain from her point of view what happened that night and why it happened. And so if we can't get to a point where a plea agreement is reached, that's exactly the reason that we have a trial. To let jurors decide what was the truth in this matter and what ought to happen.
To be clear, if Dawn wanted the treatment, she could have had it right now.
She could have had it the day she was arraigned. It was offered to her by Judge Miller, and she immediately and without hesitation turned it down.
As this case moves forward, one of the things he keeps alluding to is what happened last May.
Yes.
And I don't know if you've heard him talk about it, but essentially what he says is that she was misunderstood in that situation.
She was dangerous in that situation. When you're talking about having an individual hiding in the woods with a loaded firearm that won't come out when the police are asking her to come out, and that's happening in a neighborhood where you have hundreds of families, hundreds of children, this isn't just about her relationship with her husband. She at that moment, and that went on for hours, you have to remember how long that situation went on, was an extraordinarily difficult and dangerous situation for the police officers. They don't know what her mindset is. They don't know if her intentions are to harm herself, to harm her husband, to harm the police officers. That is not acceptable behavior. And I understand him saying it was a misunderstanding. To those police officers that were involved, it was life-threatening.
As far as the case is concerned, how does it proceed from here?
She'll have a trial date set. She's having some evaluations done at this point, and that information will be provided to her lawyer, to the state, and then you'll have some trial dates and some hearing dates that will be scheduled, I would say, in the upcoming months.
Here's something I have to address, too. He's not allowed to visit her right now. Is
That's
that right?
correct.
So they've had no contact since the day this happened?
Not that I'm aware of, and that's typical in cases where you have a victim, that there is a no contact order placed by the court as a condition of bond, or just as a condition of a pretrial supervision type of thing, where we don't want there to be a situation where there is intimidation going on between the parties, where there is improper communication going on. And so that's not particular to this case. In virtually every case that we have where there is a victim identified in the indictment, there is a no contact order placed on the record by the court.
I know you're not an expert in this matter, but why do you feel as though Jeff wants to tell his story, to tell Dawn's story?
In a lot of domestic violence situations, one of the reasons that they can be particularly difficult to prosecute is that the victims don't want to cooperate. They still have strong feelings for their abuser. They still have strong feelings for their attacker. They feel maybe they're partly responsible or fully responsible for what happened to them. And so it's one of the reasons that you can't allow solely the wishes of the victim to control the prosecution, because sometimes their thinking is clouded. And particularly in domestic violence situations, unfortunately, we see a large number of cases where the victims won't cooperate. Maybe they're afraid, or they're in such a position that they think what happened to them is their fault. And that's why you need an objective party to look at it and look at the actions that happened on that night and say, here's what we think should happen next.
Thank you for your time.
Sure.